sometime in my early 20s, I lived in Ocean City, Maryland. And during that summer, I was employed by a carnival there. I ran the bumper cars. I ran the tilt-a-whirl. I ran the avalanche. But when I got off work, I wasn't done working because I knew how to do a few things sideshow related. I learned when I was 16 years old how to do something called the human blockhead. It's basically where you pound a nail into your face with a hammer. And I learned it in the back of a moving vehicle, which is not generally the recommended way to learn sideshow stunts. But I used this information to go out at night after I got off of work and busk up and down the boardwalk. At the time, I didn't even know it was busking. I thought I invented something that people would just give me money if I showed them how to bang a nail into my face. And that's what I did to make a living supplementing my carnival gig. That was a great summer.
Curioso.
A curioso is someone who inquires in esoteric matters, a collector of knowledge.
Curioso Podcast.
I'm Christopher Scarborough.
And I'm Joe Taylor.
And welcome to the Curioso Podcast.
And today our topic is sideshows.
It's a topic that's very near and dear to my heart, considering that I am a sideshow performer. I love to talk about this. I love to eat this, breathe this, and sleep this. And
with it, for it, and never against it.
That's true. It makes a good tattoo.
Yes, it does.
So I guess the first thing that I wanted to talk about with sideshows are the three types of shows that there actually are.
Okay.
So those it just would be the singolo. We'll start off with that. The singolo is generally just it is a single attraction, just one single show with either a performer or possibly, I mean, you could have anything from the smallest pony in the world or a very small person
to Hitler's car.
Yeah, anything. I mean,
Bonnie and Clyde's car was in one of those single-O's. It's one specific thing.
That's it. So I mean, you don't get a whole lot of bang for your buck with the singolo, but that's okay because there are other types of shows as well with sideshows. The next one I would say would probably be the museum show. The museum show was basically like Joe was saying, like the Bonnie and Clyde's car. You would have wax figures would be considered like a museum kind of show. Anything where you would take a large group of things and show them off in together would be a museum show. Ripley's Auditorium
either in a room, a tent, some place that was not completely visible to the entire people walking around the circus and or the grounds, because you had to pay a dime
to get into it. Yeah,
a dime store museum.
Yeah, that was P.T. Barnum was famous for his dime museum in New York. It burnt down, I think, twice, and it was. Before there was TV, internet, and all these entertainment options, this was one of the only types. This and theater were one of the only types of.
Did you say theater?
That's how. Let's just.
That's fine. Let's say onion.
Shut up, Joe. So, yes. So one of the things that they also called the museum show, they would call it things like. The greatest freaks past and present, and the reason why they would do that is because they didn't have any live acts inside, so it was mostly just greatest freaks of the past.
Right,
so it would be you would also have like your dead baby shows, which are a lot of people don't think that's very PC, but back in the day they would have two-headed babies. They would also have taxidermied two-headed animals.
What is that? Well, there's live birth taxidermy two-headed animals, and then there is the taxidermy. What is it called?
Rogue taxidermy.
Rogue taxidermy.
Where they take and just
A Fiji mermaid,
yeah,
for example.
Exactly. Yeah, another famous P.T. Barnum invention there. But they would take, they would actually take, they would make what they're called as gaffs, and they would take two different things, and they would sew them together, fill them with some stuffing, and put them out there as an oddity, such as the Fiji mermaid. Of course, the shrunken heads. Shrunken heads were such a big deal at one point that people started manufacturing fake shrunken heads.
Yeah.
And that's practice still goes on to today, really.
But even the tribes that they got the original shrunken heads from, they would manufacture. Well, they were still shrunken heads, but they were going out and killing people
to manufacture
to make
them.
money.
Yeah,
off
supply.
of it.
That's supply and demand right there.
rather than just using their tried and true techniques when they were trying to oust the neighbor tribe, with the one shrunken head a year. Now they're talking 50, 60 a year.
Well, because they found that they could make money from that.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess the really honestly, like, you could spend a lot of time at museum shows, but they're so varied. In fact, all of Sideshow is so varied that, there's a lot of branches stemming off from circus and sideshows. I mean, honestly, I don't even think we really gave a definition of sideshow and what a sideshow is.
Okay. From what I found, it's a pretty basic term. It means the outside show. It was outside of a circus, a fair, and it started in the late 18th centuries here in America, but it evolved from as early as the 16th century in Europe. So you'd have fairs, carnivals for kings and stuff, and then you'd have...
Well, you had like the fool, the jester, the court jester.
Right, exactly.
I mean, he was trained in juggling. He learned all those kind of things.
Right, but he wasn't the main event.
No.
He was the thing you saw besides or outside of, of the main event. So in America, it became sideshow. Outside show.
Well, that's during like there was a lot of touring sideshows, like during the Dust Bowl and all that.
Yes.
And they toured America, and that's where it really took America by storm, because this was the only kind of entertainment. When the carnival came to town, you put down your dolly, which was the only, made of corn husks, and then went to the carnival. It was the only time of year. It was 1 week out of the year it was there.
And a lot of the non-sanctioned sideshow tents and vendors were local people just trying to sell, their whiskey or, their crops or trinkets or whatever, just because they knew that people would show up at these carnivals and these fairs, and it was a perfect little space that they could sell something.
It's very much kind of like how the state fair is today, the state or your county fair.
Right.
It's very much what it was like when the carnival came to town.
Right.
And that's really, I think, where they got that idea from.
Right. And, of course it evolved where, people would actually have to start paying dues to be on the grounds of the fair. But a lot of it was, they just kind of set up shop.
Yeah.
And so you'd have, everything from food vendors to whiskey to, the people playing the games of chance, trying to make a buck off of somebody somehow.
Yeah, the game joints and everything. So it would all be, you would have basically a midway, and that was the center of either went down the carnival or the circus. And at the very end, you'd have either the big top or you'd have rides, that kind of thing, with the invention of rides and electricity and all that came along. But off to the side, you would have the sideshow, and that brings us pretty much to what they call the 10-in-1. And the 10-in-1 was really, I personally think, was the granddaddy of all the sideshows.
Right. So So what is it? 10 and 1.
It means 10 acts under one tent.
Okay.
So you would have, and even though
Is it just like a grind
it's,
show?
it
Like,
would be, it would be a grind show. I mean, most of the time it would be a grind show where it would people would continuously perform over and over again. So no matter what time you entered the tent, you could stay for the entire show. And in fact, you could probably stay for more than one if you were crafty enough.
Right.
But so you had, typically 10 acts. That doesn't necessarily mean 10 performers.
Right. As we've seen personally.
Yeah, that's true.
Oh God, where was that? Coney Island Sideshow.
Sideshow by the seashore.
Yes.
Yeah.
There was maybe 4 or 5
And I think they actually
performers,
but they had 10 acts.
Yeah, everybody doubled up.
Yeah, they doubled up. So the sword swallower would also be the snake charmer or the fire eater, and so you had several people doing doing the different acts. But I mean, there were so many different acts. You would even have sometimes not just sideshow perform, but you would have magicians would would a lot of the time be the very first act.
Right, but I mean, and that's the thing that I've come up with is that all sideshow performers, even going down the list of the 3 main ones, the born freaks, the made freaks, and the working acts, they're all multi-talented people.
Yeah,
they didn't just have.
Well, they learn
one
from each
shtick.
other. They learn from each other, and
Right.
there's so much to talk about here. I mean, it's almost overwhelming because
Do you want to go into?
Well, you have the Bally. The outside talker. Don't call him a barker. They don't like that. Trust me. So you have the outside talker or the outside lecturer who would bring people in, and they would turn the tip, and the tip is basically like the crowd of people. They would draw the tip. They would draw a crowd of people inside of the time. To collect the people that have already paid and have come in, you would typically have like a magic act, because the magic act he could make his show as long or short as he needed to be. So that was why typically he would be there first, inside performing. So you would have the gentleman outside ballying, and he would maybe pull out a few performers, and they would do a few little things, or they'd have the tattooed or the illustrated man outside with a hood over his head, so you couldn't see him, but you could only see his body, or you could only see his legs. So it was like something to draw people in.
Yeah.
And they would give you a tease of what you were going to see inside. So then he would turn the tip and drop the price in order to get you to come in. People still use this to this day. This is a tried and true hook. Because this is still what happens on late night TV with pitchmen. This is exactly, and this is even where pitchmen came from with the same technique. So you would come inside, and then you would start to see the acts inside the 10 and 1. There would be 10 acts for the price of one admission, and that's why it was called the 10 and 1.
Gotcha.
So I mean, I have a very few things that I want to talk about when it comes to the 10 and 1, because this is the granddaddy. I mean, the museum shows were great, the single-os are great, but really that's where it is to me, is the 10 and 1 with all the different acts that there are. And you really had 3 types of acts with the 10 and 1. And I think you mentioned this earlier. Yeah. You had the born freak, the made freak, and the working act. So one of the things that I want to talk about with the made freaks, the first one that I want to discuss is the tattooed man.
Okay.
Or the illustrated man. So the first illustrated man that I could find was a gentleman by the name of James F. O'Connell. In 1842, P.T. Barnum was actually exhibiting him in one of his dime museums. So he was actually the very first tattooed man to be exhibited. So I mean, of course, there's plenty that are still exhibited today and throughout history. Who do we have? Katzen, Enigma. You have Eric Sprague, the Lizard Man. Matt Gaughan, the Checkered Man. I mean, there's just I mean, in other countries, they're all over the place.
Throughout history, you had Yakuza, the Maori, Mayans. People have been doing tattoos for as long as they can figure out they can stick needles in their skin.
Absolutely, and they're not just tattooed men that are exhibited. Typically, there's tattooed women. A lot of tattooed women. So one of the things that is kind of cool about the tattooed people is not only were they exhibited, but they were also, a lot of the time on the lot, they were also the tattoo artist.
So you make a few bucks off of being exhibited, and then turn around and basically sell your skills putting the same or different artwork on someone else.
Absolutely. After the show was over, they would go and they would tattoo people for extra money, and that was a way that they could make extra money.
Nice.
One of the funny things that I found as well was they would have stories. That's a thing that you're going to find, a thread that you're going to find through this entire podcast and through all of Sideshow, that these fantastical stories that would come up with that were very much stretching the truth. And the tattooed man or the tattooed women, there was a lot of tattooed women as well.
It's been more of a shocker to people back in the oldie days.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And they would come up with these tales and stories that they were kidnapped by a Maori tribe and they were forced to be tattooed, and the last woman that tattooed him he would have to marry, so he would just continue to get tattooed, and then he wound up fleeing, and then eventually came to this sideshow after fleeing, the tribe, so he didn't have to marry one of them, one of these savage tattooed people, and he himself now was a tattooed person and ostracized. So this is the only way that he can make money, besides tattooing people later on.
So the stories were very, very elaborate and ridiculous at times, just to the shock value. It was
absolutely,
all shock value.
Absolutely. But it was great. But it still is.
Yeah,
it still is great.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite things.
Yeah.
And that's you'll even see at tattoo conventions. You'll see lots. They'll hire one of the checker guy or the blue guy or the green guy to come out to the tattoo conventions and entertain people.
Right.
So I guess the next that I wanted to talk about was the living skeletons.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So the original living skeleton that I found, his name was Isaac W. Sprague.
So these aren't like anorexics.
Well, here's the thing: is that there's a, pardon the pun, a thin line between what is known and what isn't, because some people say that he had a disorder and he had a big appetite, but this guy he was born in 1860. Oh, I'm sorry. In 1865, he was spotted and was offered a job by the head of a local carnival, and under a year, he was eventually picked up by P.T. Barnum, the great P.T. Barnum, and to work in his dime museum in New York. So, the thing is that people say that he had actually a great appetite, and he would actually keep like a sweetened condensed milk in like a flask to try and keep his sugar up, because I guess his metabolism was so high.
Right.
But, I'm sure that there was plenty of living skeletons that were just anorexics.
Yeah. This is before, Vogue.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So,
all the wafy girls and... the super slender guys, like that was their
gig. They were the living skeleton.
Meal ticket, as it were.
So one of the best things that I found out about the living skeleton was that typically you would have the living skeleton, and they would of course invite all the media for the marriage between the living skeleton and the world's largest person, the fat man or the fat woman.
Right.
So, and I guess that brings us to the fat man or the fat woman.
Yeah.
The fat folk, if you will.
Right. The morbidly obese.
Yeah, absolutely. And now the fat people, they could have a thyroid problem.
Yeah.
But back then...
Did they have thyroids back then?
I think so, yeah. I think we all do. But the thing is that now, there are plenty of morbidly obese people.
Yeah,
so it's
like
not
trying to spot the thin person in the crowd.
Exactly. Yeah, but it's not really odd or strange nowadays, but
Yeah.
back then, having someone who was 600 pounds was
Yeah.
definitely an oddity,
Yes.
and an oddity to come and see. And so I don't know who the first fat person was, but but I can tell you who the last fat man was. The very last fat man.
The last fat man that was at a sideshow.
Yes,
Okay, that
was actually
was
performed
billed as a performer.
and billed and performed as a fat man. And
you can't say the last fat
No,
because there's
no.
one down the street.
Yeah.
You know, we're gonna see a couple tomorrow.
But his name was Bruce Snowden.
Okay.
Bruce Snowden weighed in at about 607 pounds. He worked for Ward Hall at the World of Wonders Sideshow.
Okay.
Now he was I read some interviews about him, and he said that he took a look at some pictures of fat men that he found in a book, and he said, "Well, hell, I'm bigger than them. This is ridiculous." So, and he had like three separate. He actually had 3 separate degrees.
Wow.
I mean, he wasn't like.
So he wasn't a big fat dummy. He was
No,
just a big
no,
fat
he was a
guy.
smart guy.
Big fat smart guy.
Yeah, so he basically he said, you know, I can make money by doing this, by just exhibiting myself and living my life,
Yeah.
and that's what he did. He eventually he actually was he played himself in the movie Big Fish.
Oh,
He was actually it was his name that he was.
Tim Burton film.
So and so eventually he did pass in November 2009. So, but one of the things that I love is that pitch this, and it kind of goes a little something like this. He's so big and so fat, it takes a boxed car to lug him and 4 girls to hug him.
Nice.
That's my favorite. It's just it just always rings through my head, and that was one of the Ballys that they would have for the fat man.
Nice. And there's so many. The list of made freaks is enormous.
Yeah,
It is
yeah.
enormous.
There's
you know, everything from tattoos to weight problems to just retired old sailors painting themselves black and teasing their hair up and calling themselves savage Zulus from other countries.
the geek.
Yes,
the geek.
yes.
Yeah,
So
the geek act.
The list is endless. So when we'll post some stuff, you know, just various sites you can go and actually delve into the world of made freaks, and it is extensive.
So I guess that brings us to our next type of act, which would be the born freak. Mm-hmm. So the born freak are people that are actually born with abnormalities, with problems, genetic disorders.
Right.
I mean, you know, and I just have a very short list of sideshow performers who were actually born freaks. And one thing about the born freak, unlike the made freak or the working act, these kind of people were like known as the king of the sideshow because they lived it in and out. I mean, they were born this way.
Right.
You know,
right. There was no way to alter your physical appearance.
That's who they were.
No amount of juggling of chainsaws to top, you know, a 2-headed girl.
Absolutely,
You know,
absolutely.
just no way.
So you know, and a lot of the time, the born freak wound up actually making so much money that they used to have their own show. A lot of the time, they were the owners of the shows.
Wow.
A lot of the time, and still exhibited.
Right.
So
right.
I mean, you know, but you know, you have anything from little people to the tall man. But here's a little list of what I have.
Okay.
The first born freak I wanted to talk about was Schlitz the Pinhead.
Okay.
Schlitz came a little bit after Zip the Pinhead. Zip, of course, eventually there was a cartoon, Zippy the Pinhead, was made after him, but Schlitz came a little bit after him. But Schlitz was born in 1901, I don't know if I can pronounce this word. It was Microcephalus.
Microcephalus.
Microcephalus,
Yes.
that's it. And it's basically, someone who has a smaller than normal cranium, and it's typically pointed.
Right.
But I mean, it's basically like a general term for anyone who has like a disformed cranium. Yeah.
Right.
So they were typically billed as such thing as like the last of the Aztecs, or the last of some distant tribe that was a branch off of Homo sapiens, or
Right.
sometimes even billed as like from other planets.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah, so one of the cool things about Schlitz, he was actually, there's some confusion there, and I'll get to that in a minute. But he was actually famous for being in Todd Browning's Freaks. So he is the pinhead that is in Todd Browning's Freaks,
Which is an amazing, amazing movie.
Absolutely. And he toured like basically with all the major circuses at some point. But the reason why he was billed as a female most of the time was because he wore
muumuu.
Well, yeah, a
muumuu.
muumuu, dresses basically.
Yeah.
And the only reason why he really wore those was because he really only had the intellect of a 4-year-old,
Right.
because
So,
of his
incontinent.
disorder. He was incontinent,
Right.
and that was why he wore those dresses. But apparently, like, everyone who handled him and took care of him said that he was always filled with wonder at every single thing, and was loved by everyone. So let's see. I'm sorry, I apologize. I missed my place there. So eventually after touring and everything, eventually wound up sometime during the 60s being institutionalized. His guardian was actually the chimp handler for one of the shows, and when he passed away sometime during the 60s, his daughter didn't know what to do with Schlitzie and
Right.
just institutionalized him.
Right.
So eventually Schlitzie passed in 1971 at the age of 71 years old. And
Wow.
I know that there was something going on out in LA where they were actually giving Schlitzie a better headstone.
Okay.
Because I think he was in a completely unmarked grave. So I did read something about that. And
Part of the home that he was in, they just had like a lot.
yeah, and eventually I think they just, some people put some money together to decide to give him a
proper-
decent headstone.
Nice.
So, I mean, because he was a performer for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
Really never went into retirement until the 60s.
Yeah.
So, but I guess the next performer is near and dear to my heart because he is from Baltimore.
Mm-hmm.
And
I know who
that's,
this is.
yeah, that's Johnny Eckert, or as his stage name was, Johnny Eck. Johnny Eck was born in 1911, and he was born with no lower half. He was a half man. He had nothing basically below the ribs.
Right.
He was basically only 18 inches tall. Johnny Eck was not just a sideshow performer. He was an artist, a photographer, a magician. He was a race car driver, a swimmer, an actor.
Wait. Race car driver?
Yeah, he drove race cars. Yeah, and he was also a train conductor at one point.
Wow.
Yeah, so he was billed as the king of freaks.
Nice.
Him and his brother Robert. They were twin brothers.
So did Robert just have the lower half and no upper half?
No, he was completely fully formed. But I have something funny about that. They would do this thing. They would actually. Do you know the magician's illusion? The woman sawed in half.
Yes.
Well,
yes.
they
I
would
remember
do that, but
Yeah.
they had a twist on it. So basically, the magician would come out and he would be performing, and this guy was heckling from the audience. Well, this was actually Robert Eckert. So Robert Eckert would heckle him, and they would put Robert in the box, and they would go and saw it.
Yeah.
And then when they opened it up, the bottom half would just lift up and start running away. Well, the bottom half was actually a dwarf with a pair of like pants that were made
Right.
up to look like it was just legs.
Uh-huh.
And then Johnny Eck would get up and go, hey legs, come on back here, and start running after him with
On
his
his
hands.
hands.
And I mean, literally, you had people fainting in the audience.
Yeah,
You had
so
people
disturbing.
running. But that is like one of the greatest stories that I have ever heard from Sideshow.
Wow.
So Johnny Eck was very, very famous for his one-armed handstand, where he would. I mean, if you've never seen it, you just have to look it up.
Yeah.
You have to internet this.
Yeah, it's
you have to Google it.
amazing.
It is really cool. But he was also in the movie Freaks.
Yes, he was. Yep.
And famous for that. And he eventually passed in 1991 at the age of 79.
Wow.
Now, just recently, Joe and I went to the Baltimore Ripley's Believe It or Not Museum, and they had a very good section just specifically
it was a
for
nice
Johnny
exhibit.
Eck, and I very, very much like the exhibit. So I guess that brings us on to the working acts. So the working acts are, well, actually, mostly today, they are when you see a sideshow, whether you go out and you see a real sideshow that is touring, or you go and see someone that's performing at a dime museum, or if you go and see a nightclub act that says that they have sideshow. Typically, the working act is what you see. Now, there are a few people. I know the 999 Eyes actually have real freaks, and there are a few real freaks that still perform today, even though some people don't like the idea of people being called freaks, and the whole PC issue. But there are still some people that work as born freaks, and plenty of as made freaks, like we talked about. But
definitely in other countries, they're, I wouldn't say more popular, but they're more accepted because other countries tend not to be as anal retentive and PC as America.
Yeah.
So,
with great freedom comes great prices, I guess.
Yeah, with great power comes great responsibility.
So my act, the Scarred and Dangerous Thrill Show, I'm only one half of. The other half is Dangerous D. He's currently living in California, and he's going to call in from time to time to give you his 2 cents about all of our topics here on the Curioso.
Now, all dangers considered, a moment with Dangerous D.
In this story, I need to explain. This is the one question I get asked most frequently. How did you get started in the world of Sideshow? Well, it actually started for me about 5 years ago. I used to work in a retail store with a good buddy of mine, Chris Scarborough. And he was always into magic and sideshow and things like that. And we'd be late at night, and we'd be working on facing and front product to close down the store. And he'd roll up on me and be like, hey, pat me on the shoulder, check this out. Bang, bang down to his face. And they'd go, help, hey, check this out. Run a skewer through his arm. I mean, dude's crazy. We'd go sit in the back for lunch break. I'd sit down. I mean, we were only making like a bag of peanuts a week. I'd sit down, I'd eat like my mom would make me like a stuffed pepper sandwich, type deal, a big greasy monstrosity. He'd sit down, open up his lunchbox, and pull out a light bulb. Dude was always conditioning, always practicing. It's crazy. So I was intrigued, like a fan first, performer second. So really got into it. I was like, dude, you need to, I was playing music and stuff, so I was performing in clubs. I was like, man, you need to put something together, put a show together, and get out to these clubs and perform with me. So he was like, well, come over one day, we'll drink a few beers, and we'll figure it out. So I went over there, and the long and the short, when I showed up, he basically looked at me and said, have you ever tried anything? Have you ever performed like this before, done anything? Nah, just, I could be a hype man, though. I could scream and yell like crazy. He's like, well, why don't you do me a favor? He's like, why don't you see if you could slide through this? And he hands me a toilet seat. Seriously, right? Toilet seat. I'm like, what? All right. So I start trying to slide through this thing and, wiggle my way through. I get stuck. You got to break out the saw glove, chisel me out. Week later, hands me a wire coat hanger. Said, hey, see if you can slide through this. I'm like, what the? So I get stuck. He has to clip me out of it. 1 week later, I show up and he hands me a tennis racket with the guts cut out and he says, slide through this or I will make you slide through this. So by hook or by crook, I actually got through the tennis racket and then the sideshow was born. That's when the Scarborough Sideshow had begun. And then later on it had changed the name. We changed the name to the Scarred and Dangerous Thrill Show. And actually you can check out some of our videos of all the crazy shit that we do on our YouTube. It's youtube.com/DDMalfi. We have a web series up called Living Dangerously. Shows you how the two of us get crazy. And remember, we will do bar mitzvahs. We will do little kids 16, sweet 16 birthday parties, all age shows, G shows, X-rated. We'll do whatever. It doesn't matter. But either way, the wonderful world of Sideshow. With it, for it, and never against it. Thanks, guys.
So I guess the working act is the next thing I wanted to talk about. And the first, I guess really the first one I wanted to talk about was, how about fire eating?
Okay.
So ever since Prometheus came down from the heavens...
Wait. To find the aliens?
No.
Okay.
You're talking...
Yeah, I
no.
know.
Okay. So Prometheus came down from the heavens and handed us fire. People have enjoyed watching and enjoying the heat of fire.
Right.
So, fire eating. I mean, it's
ancient.
Ancient. It's
ancient. Egyptians did it. Royalty had, court people that did it. Even it's
ancient Greece. I mean, it's
even been done as religious, attainment or atonement, or just in celebrations for religious reasons, through multiple cultures. So it has been around for a very, very long time.
Well, I mean, it's one of the most primal fears that we have. I mean, being burnt.
Yeah.
I mean, ever since you're a child, touching the stove and feeling the heat on it and burning yourself. I mean, it's a primal fear of fire.
Right.
So to take that fire and put it in your face,
and down your pie hole
is very, very scary. Trust me, I very much remember my first time eating fire.
Me too.
So, and then so there's basically there's fire eating, and then there's people that do fire hooping and fire poi,
and fire breathing and
Now, I think that there is a difference between fire eating and fire breathing.
Yes,
but
of course.
It's really like fire breathing is very, very cool, but it's blowing a fireball is very, very cool to see.
Right.
But you can't just have an act just on blowing fireballs.
Right.
So what you do is you do fire eating, which is basically lots of different. I hate to say tricks. I always hate to say tricks when I talk about Sideshow, but basically fire eating tricks is what they call it. So it's
a procedure, it's a routine. Whether it's to jump one flame to another,
touching your tongue and lighting the other torch.
Right.
There's all kinds of different ways that you can play with fire and make it look very, very cool. So
definitely.
I guess the next thing that I wanted to talk about is most definitely a Sideshow staple, and that would be sword swallowing.
Yes.
So sword swallowing, I mean, it's at least a 4,000-year-old art. The oldest accounts that they found is basically in India. It was these ancient fakirs, these holy men, these shaman that would swallow swords. You actually take the sword, throw your head back, and drop it into the pit of your stomach. All the way down past your esophagus, past your heart, past your lungs. A lot of people do think it's a trick, though.
Yeah. And there probably were several con men who came up with retractable...
You can buy them on the internet.
Yeah,
they still exist today, just like the retractable knives at the dime store that you
the old Elvira knife.
That you could pretend to stab somebody with. They make swords like that, but a real sword swallower is something to behold. I mean, there's less than a few dozen sword swallowers that are still performing today.
Right.
Some people have actually quit from injuries.
And it's a scary thing that you're talking. If you have a sword that is an inch longer than it should be,
you can definitely pierce your stomach.
Perforations and
absolutely,
so many horrible things that can happen.
So just recently, I actually had the honor of performing at Ripley's, believe it or not, at World Sword Swallowing Day, and I think I was the newest. The one in Baltimore. The World Sword Swallowing Day, it actually happens every year, the last Saturday in February.
Right.
So I I had the honor of performing at the Ripley's or Not in Baltimore, my hometown, and Joe, you were there.
Yeah.
So
it was
it was a
pretty
spectacle.
cool
It was pretty cool.
yeah.
So there was 5 of us, and I think between the 5 of us there, we swallowed 17, 18 swords, something like that.
Yep.
And all around the world, in different Ripley's, believe it or not, people were doing the same thing.
Yes.
So I think that I was the newest sword swallower. I had only learned at that time how to drop a blade 2 months before that.
Yeah, and that's been years.
In the making.
Years.
At least 5 to 6 years that I've been training myself how to swallow swords, and I finally was able to do it. I was very honored and very proud to be there. But one of the reasons why Ripley's hosts this event was because the first auditorium actually was at the Chicago's World Fair in 1933. They actually had 3 sword swallowers there. 2 of them were actually women.
Right.
Which is actually kind of switched now because there's actually more male sword swallowers than there are women sword swallowers. But excuse me. But yeah, sword swallowing is definitely an amazing art, and something that I struggled very hard to try and do myself.
Yeah.
And I love it. I can't believe that this is possible.
You're sticking a chunk of metal.
Well, let me tell you, when you have it down your throat,
Yeah.
it's as I guess I consider him my mentor. As my mentor, Todd Robbins, told me once as I was trying to learn sword swallowing, I said, Todd, how does it feel when you actually get it down? And he said, it feels like you're being stabbed, but there's less pain.
So it's a not so painful
Not so
stabbing.
pleasurable. Not so
It's an
pleasurable.
uncomfortable stabbing.
Absolutely. So
Right.
I guess that brings us to our next working act subject, and we're only going to do maybe 3 or a few of these. We're not going to do all of them because
There is an extensive list.
there's
again.
so many. I mean, glass walking, fire walking, the human pincushion. There's so many, but these are the I guess to me like the big ones.
Yeah,
you
well,
know.
I mean, even knife throwers or chainsaw thrower, the whip girls. So many.
So
many.
all the pretty acts, the stuff that all of the cowboy acts that you have. I mean, there's just so many. The hooch girls and the hoochie cooch.
The hoochie cooch.
I mean, there's so many things, and we're just gonna have. I mean, this is such a big subject that we are definitely gonna have to go through this piece by piece, episode through episode, and do all of these. And we might even hit some of the things that we've already discussed and talked about again,
Right, but
in a full-fledged episode. But this next one is called the human blockhead. The human blockhead is actually when you take and you pound a nail or a spike or an ice pick up your nose.
Or I've seen a drill bit.
A drill bit, yeah.
I've seen so many implements.
I call that the human screw head, or as I accidentally put the 2 words together, the human screeweed.
Nice.
Yeah, I did that on a set list one time, and I said the screeweed. I was like, I don't even know what that is, and I wrote this. Yeah, it was pretty funny. But so the person who really actually it gets credited for the human blockhead is a guy named Melvin Burkhardt. Okay. Melvin was performed the human blockhead. Well, Melvin was born in 1907. Performed for most of the major circus acts of the time.
Right.
He performed in all of the sideshows, and he used to do. He was an anatomical wonder. He could actually suck his body up so you could actually see his spine through his stomach.
Wow.
He would do amazing acts, and he would. One of the cool things that he would do was the human blockhead, and he was actually an amateur boxer. Okay. I think his record. I saw somewhere his record was 0-6. So he didn't win very many fights.
He didn't box with a nail in his nose.
No. But because he boxed and he had so much cartilage broken, he actually could use a much larger nail than most people did. And I've seen his nail. Todd Robbins actually showed me his nail.
It wasn't no 10 penny.
No, it looks like a railroad spike. It's huge. But it was so funny because not only would he do, the entire large nail, he would actually use this little teeny tiny tack hammer to hammer it in. So it was pretty great. But the reason why it's called the human blockhead is actually because Robert Ripley saw him perform the act. He actually was performing the act for Robert Ripley, and he said, "Melvin, you are a true blockhead."
Just as in you're a dummy?
Yeah, he was just, I think he was ribbing him.
Right,
he was ribbing him. But that is the reason why he called the act the human blockhead. And he would just give the act away. He would tell people how to do it. He was an amazing performer and a great guy. And he would let people perform his act. And I mean, and that's why we call the human blockhead today. And I'm so glad that I was able to talk about Melvin because he is definitely a thread that runs through Sideshow. He was an amazing performer. So, I don't know. I guess the only other thing that I wanted to discuss that I think we can probably fit in this episode is my heroes.
Okay.
So, I guess really the first one of my heroes would be Jim Rose.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I was little being exposed to the movie Freaks.
Yeah.
And then several carnivals and circuses. And then, early mid-90s, there was this sort of menagerie of sideshow and music that I knew, that was on one stage, and it was the Jim Rose.
Yeah, I think it was Lollapalooza. I don't remember what year, but I mean, I definitely saw it was sometime during the 90s, and I saw Jim Rose perform, and I said, somebody can make a living doing this?
Yeah.
And it was amazing. Absolutely.
Nowadays, like that was the mind blower.
Yeah.
Is that this has been done throughout history since 15th century.
Yeah.
And in modern times, when we've got interwebs and the YouTube and a billion TV channels and people are constantly instant gratification, you can still make a living just being an extraordinarily strange person,
Absolutely.
and having, phenomenal, abilities and, quirks. And
what I think is really cool, he actually was able to bring Sideshow back to life, to breathe life into it.
Yes. I mean, he was lucky.
I mean, it might be a zombie now, but I mean, he brought it back to life.
Right. I mean, he was lucky because during that time, especially our generation and generation before us, a lot of it had to do with the films that were coming out, the music that was coming out. It played very, very well with American culture at the time.
Absolutely.
At least in the subcultures and the broader areas that we were living in. So it did very, very well in that market, and even now, he kind of opened the door to smaller venues, and then resurgence
to know that this can be a viable entertainment option.
Right.
So I guess from Jim Rose being, the wild, crazy antics that he is, swinging back in the other direction, one of my other heroes, of course, is Todd Robbins. Now, Todd Robbins, he just recently had an off-Broadway play called Play Dead. And I could not make it out, but I heard that they actually were able to tape it, and it was at some film festival, and I'm hoping that they're going to actually take it and put it on DVD because I would love to see it. So Todd Robbins does, of course, the human blockhead. He does so many different things, but he's really known for his glass eating.
Right.
Light bulb eating, and it's amazing. He's done several commercials and for different antacid tablets and things like that.
Right.
But I actually learned a lot of what I know from Todd Robbins. I went to Sideshow by the Seashore, and he was actually teaching a class, and I stayed up in New York in a terrible hostel for a whole week, and I took the train from like the Upper West Side to Coney Island every single day.
The day you told everybody that you were doing it, it reminded me of that scene in The Simpsons where Homer says they're all at the dinner table, everybody's eating, and Homer's playing with mashed potatoes, making a circus tent. And he says, "That's it. I'm going to clown college." And everybody
pretty
was
much
like,
what happened.
"What?"
Well, I think I mean I used to busk. I did all kinds of I
but
did juggling and things like that. But I said I'm tapped out.
Yeah,
I can't learn sword swallowing and fire eating by myself.
Right.
I knew the human blockhead, but I didn't want to learn that stuff by myself.
Yeah.
I didn't want to look on the internet and wind up a casualty of it.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
ridiculous. So I went and I learned from a master.
Yes, you did.
So I went up there and I learned from him. And I mean, I wound up meeting a lot of really cool performers. And eventually came back, put my act together, and you know, and went on to what I did. But I really think Todd is a great performer. But you know, as compared to like Jim Rose, Todd is a much more controlled performer.
Right.
He's he plays it down, but plays it wonderfully. And if you ever get a chance to see one of his shows, you really should. You definitely should go do it.
Right, and that's, I mean, I think that's the wonderful thing about, you know, sideshows is that you can see the most extreme sideshows and be blown away. And then you can see the most precise, honed, and, you know, every care is taken to make sure you understand what's going on.
Absolutely. And that's what I'm talking about. Like, as where Jim Rose is the shocking, you know, lifto.
And it's still amazing.
You have Todd Robbins who plays up on the humor and the comedy of it and really makes you laugh.
Right. It's that borderline between
Two totally
vaudeville.
different. Exactly.
Yeah.
Two totally different people. But I guess that brings us to the third person who's definitely one of my heroes, and that would be James Taylor. James Taylor,
Not the singer.
not the singer. No.
Singer.
James Taylor is he actually lives right here in Baltimore as well. And James Taylor is actually the editor of Shocked and Amazed magazine. It's the only periodical about Sideshow, and I mean it's amazing. If you ever get a chance to pick one of them up, you should definitely do it. I think I have all of them besides number 1 and number 3, and those are going to be very, very hard to get because I think that from like 5 on down, they wound up like burning in a fire. So I mean, so they're very, very hard to get a hold of, especially number 1.
Do you have them in plastic with backing?
Yeah,
everything?
I do,
NRFB?
and I flip through them with my white. With my white gloves. Yeah, absolutely. You know, I wanted to also mention James Taylor was also the curator of the American Dime Museum that was in Baltimore, right there on Maryland Street, and I used to go there all the time, and I love the place. But eventually, it just wound up, you know, having to close down. I mean, it's not a traveling museum. It was a stationary museum. So you only have a certain amount of draw. So eventually he wound up moving some of his collection to the Palace of Wonders over in D.C., which was a venue that specifically catered to sideshow and burlesque.
Yeah.
So, which was an amazing venue, but that eventually closed down, and it merged with the place next door and became the Red Palace, which merged with the Red and the Black, and which... when the Red Palace closed down just a little while ago, this is terrible. I actually had the very pleasure of performing on the last week that they were open.
Yep.
And that was wonderful. Did a great show with a whole bunch of burlesque acts. So, I mean, I don't even know where to go from here. That was pretty much almost everything that I have prepared my brain to discuss tonight. I mean, there's so much more. But some of the things that I wanted to mention, you know, also some of the websites that we were talking about. You should definitely go to sideshowworld.com. That is an awesome site with so much more stuff than your brain can even handle. Another website that I found, thehumanmarvels.com, was amazing. And check out a podcast called Ballycast if you get a chance. Ballycast is an amazing podcast put on by Wayne Kaiser, and if you get a chance, make sure you download episode 28, because that was an episode that I was on when I was in the Scarborough Sideshow, and you should definitely check that out.
Nice. All right. Until next time, thank you for listening to Curioso Podcast, and we'll see you later.
See you next time.
Sound like the Wonder Years.
That's the point.
I know.
That's what I'm trying to do. You know what I mean? I'm trying to give you a little Wonder Years.
Little Wonder Years. A little help, my friend.
That's exactly my point. I'm trying.